tell you just a little bit about myself, and I'll follow your lead, Chris, in terms of the presentation that I have about the upcoming election. I've covered the White House since 1995, since Bill Clinton's first term. So the Clinton, the Bush, the Obama, and now the Trump administrations. I've covered a lot of incredible events over the years. I've been there for just about every historic moment that's occurred at the White House over the course of the past 25 plus years, including on 9/11. And so it's my honor and my pleasure to speak to AmCham Bulgaria today to talk a little bit, to the extent that we can, about the upcoming presidential election. I think just the top line headline from me is it's going to be exceptionally close. That's the way I view this particular race, and we'll go into the details shortly.
All right. And for those of you who don't know me, I'll say a few words about myself, so I'm not like this mysterious host. I'm a college professor at Cal State Long Beach, but I was a journalist for many years in Bulgaria before that, and then in the US. And I was actually editing the AmCham Bulgaria magazine, which sadly is not printed anymore, but exists as a website. And those are very, very, very good years and very good memories with AmCham. John, I guess we're heading into an election that has probably two major distinctions. It might be the election with the most massive turnout I think since 1876, when Rutherford Hayes was elected, and there was a big debate about Reconstruction at the time. I think something over like 82% of voters turned out. Or we might have an election where people might be so afraid of COVID and the mail system might be so problematic that the turnout might be actually historically low. And then it's also an election that certainly will be the most expensive in history. I saw estimates of something like $2.4 billion spent just on the presidential race, and then you add all the down ballot races. Right. Explain this to us. Tell us what is going on. Why is this such a great degree of uncertainty, unpredictability, and at the same time obvious excitement that we have with this election?
Well, this is election, Chris, that people, I think, have already made up their minds. They've made up their minds in terms of how they're going to vote in November. November the 3rd is our election day. They've decided whether they're going to vote for President Trump or essentially against President Trump, because that's what this election is all about. It's a referendum on the president's 4 years in office. Elections aren't always referendums like that. Sometimes they're just contests pitting two candidates against each other, Donald Trump against Joe Biden. But this election will certainly be a referendum on Donald Trump. And to a certain extent, I don't think the Trump campaign likes that. They'd rather see it be a contest between just simply Joe Biden and his vision for the future of America and the rest of the world versus Donald Trump and his vision for America and the rest of the world. You touched upon the fact that we are having this election during an unusual time, during COVID, during the coronavirus pandemic. And as a result, you are going to see more Americans than ever voting by mail. And many states have made that easier over the course of the last few months. And so what we saw in 2016 is 30% of the electorate voted by mail. And that is a pretty significant number. You're going to see that number likely go up significantly this election cycle on November the 3rd and the weeks preceding November the 3rd. And there's a concern that it will take time to determine the winner of the U.S. election because so many individuals, so many American voters are mailing in their ballots, and those ballots obviously have to be counted. If you want, Chris, I can go through my presentation now, and then after not very long, just a few slides that I'll explain as we go through. And after that, you and I can have a conversation about things that maybe you saw during the presentation that are not clear to you. And of course, anybody else on this webinar that has questions, we have plenty of time for that. So I'd be more than happy to take your questions in that regard as well. So why don't we start with that first slide? And it's not a, it's just sort of a title page more than anything else. Let's go to the next slide after this first slide. That's just a pretty map of the United States with an American flag. And let's leave it on this slide just for a moment to remind you how we got to where we are right now. Joe Biden, of course, is the Democratic nominee, but it was a contest to become the Democratic nominee. And the first two contests in that race to become the standard bearer for the Democratic Party, the winner of those first two contests was Bernie Sanders, the senior senator from the state of Vermont. Actually, let me correct myself. Despite his age, he's actually the junior senator from the state of Vermont. Patrick Leahy is the senior senator. But in any case, this cycle started out, this contest started out with Bernie Sanders being the front runner. And Joe Biden had to work himself from behind. He won a contest in South Carolina, and that essentially gave him the momentum to propel him ultimately to winning the Democratic nomination. You may see that in this list of challengers, one picture is not here, and that is the picture of Kamala Harris, who is on the ticket as the vice presidential nominee for Democrats. The reason why she's missing is she actually dropped out before the first contest took place. She realized that she didn't have a path to win the Democratic nomination. And in hindsight, I think she smartly dropped out of the contest early on. And ultimately, Joe Biden saw her, I should say, as really the best choice to round out his ticket. And it's worked out well in terms of raising money for the ticket. In fact, Chris, you mentioned in the introduction how much money has been spent already and how much money will be spent. And if you look at what happened in the month of August, Joe Biden's campaign outraised President Trump's campaign by $154 million. And that is obviously a very significant figure. Let's move on to the next slide. Are we having a...
I think that there's this frozen.
It's coming. It's coming.
There we go.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not going to spend that much time. There are a limited amount of slides. I think there's 6 altogether, so nothing to, make your eyes glaze over or anything. But let's just remind you about President Trump. President Trump surprised a lot of people in 2016 by winning the presidential election. He is the incumbent. With incumbency comes advantages, typically. One of those advantages, however, as I just discussed, is not there. Typically, the incumbent raises more money than the challenger, and that's not what we're seeing as of late in this particular contest. But there are advantages to being the incumbent. As you may see, even in Bulgaria with the press conferences that take place almost on a regular basis at the White House, the president can have these events at the White House and they get the attention of the cable networks and the television broadcast networks because he's got the power of the presidency. So if the president calls a news conference, more often than not, CNN and MSNBC and Fox are going to cover it live. When the president has a Mideast peace signing ceremony on the south lawn of the White House, which took place last Wednesday, I was there for that. That's going to get attention from the cable networks and the broadcast networks. So there are definitely some advantages to being the incumbent. And let's not forget, the president, this was a first in history. The president had his convention, his acceptance speech for the Republican presidential nomination right there at the White House on the South Lawn. I was there for that as well. And that is something we've never seen before. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So this is important to look at. These are the final results for the 2016 presidential election. And what's important to remember is that in America, we do not choose our president by popular vote, like most countries in the world do. We choose our president by what's called the Electoral College. And each state has a number of electoral votes, and the number of electoral votes that each state has is dependent upon how much population resides in that particular state. So you can see in this chart that I've put up there, this slide that I've put up there, California, Texas, and New York have the most electoral votes. And typically, and I think it will be the case in 2020, we know how those states are going to vote. Texas is red, signifying it's going to vote for President Trump. California is blue. It will vote for former Vice President Joe Biden. And New York is blue. It will also vote for former Vice President Joe Biden. If you look at this chart right here, this slide, you'll notice that there are certain states which are red, which in past presidential elections have typically gone Democratic. So Pennsylvania is a perfect example in the northeast portion of the United States map. It's 20 electoral votes. Since 1988, since the election of George H.W. Bush, the state after that election had voted Democratic. It voted for Bill Clinton twice. It voted for it voted for Al Gore in 2000. It voted for John Kerry in 2004, for Barack Obama twice. But in 2016, Pennsylvania flipped. It went for Donald Trump, and President Trump won the state of Pennsylvania by less than 1 percentage point. And so that helped him on his road to 270 electoral votes. That's what you need to win the presidency. There are other states to pay attention to as well in this particular slide for 2016. Those are the states on the northern part of the United States of Michigan and also Wisconsin. Those two states typically vote for the Democratic nominee. But in 2016, they too flipped. They went for Donald Trump, surprised a lot of people. In fact, I had an event in person. And by the way, thank you, AmCham Bulgaria. This is just so terrific to be with you, and I'm honored to be able to do this presentation. Last April, before COVID, I had an opportunity to do an event in person in Amsterdam at AmCham Netherlands. And while I was there, I had a lunch with the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands, a gentleman by the name of Pete Hoekstra. He's a former U.S. congressman from Michigan. He was essentially in charge of running the Trump campaign in Michigan. And over lunch, he confided in me. He said, you know what? I was surprised that President Trump won Michigan in 2016. I worked really hard, obviously, for the president, but I must say that the results surprised even me. And so that gives you an idea about how surprising the results were in the state of Michigan, which are pretty significant, you know, in terms of the amount of electoral votes that Michigan has. The president won Michigan by 13,000 votes out of millions of votes cast, so barely won the state of Michigan. And one of the reasons is because I think that Hillary Clinton in Michigan and like in Wisconsin took those states for granted. She thought, well, they typically vote for the Democratic nominee. I don't have to spend a lot of time there. I don't have to spend a lot of money there. They're going to go for me. I can concentrate on other states. And in hindsight, in 2020 hindsight, that was a huge mistake by Hillary Clinton because she ended up losing Michigan and she ended up losing Wisconsin. So what Donald Trump did in 2016 is he put together an electoral map that very few people believed was possible. An electoral map in which the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, won Pennsylvania, he won Michigan, and he won Wisconsin. And that put him on the path to winning 270 electoral votes. And so when the Trump campaign in 2020 looks at their path to 270, they start, as you would imagine, by looking at this map. In a perfect world, they'd love to repeat this map and what it looks like. They'd like to repeat the victories that they got in 2016. But 2020, it's different. The conditions are different. And I'll go through that in a moment. And I don't think that the 2020 map is going to look like the 2016 map. In this map of 2016, you see that it's pretty red. You might think, wow, what a huge landslide by President Trump in 2016. And you'd be right if you're talking about the Electoral College. I think that 306 to 232 qualifies as an electoral landslide. But you have to remember that the reason why this state is colored so red with just pockets of blue on the West Coast and on the East Coast, you also see the president won in Minnesota and Illinois, is because many of the least populous states in our country are states that typically vote Republican. So right in the middle of the country, states like Nebraska and Wyoming, they typically vote for the Republican presidential nominee. And you'll also notice, I realize the map isn't there, but I will talk about the state of Florida, because Florida typically is a battleground state in presidential elections. You may recall that in the 2000 presidential election, that's the slide I want, that's perfect. In the 2000 presidential election, the state of Florida decided the presidential election when, after literally millions of votes were counted in the year 2000, George W. Bush won the state of Florida by just 537 votes. That's it. That essentially decided the presidency. And in 2004, 4 years later, one state essentially decided the presidential election, and that was the state of Ohio. That was a state that George W. Bush won, and that put him over the top in terms of what was needed, 270 votes to win the Electoral College. As this is the second to last slide. So in the next slide, I'll explain where I see the race today. But before I get to that, let's look at, let's go back. Yeah, that's right. Before I get to that, let's look at the 2016 popular vote. Because what we saw in 2016 is that Donald Trump lost to Hillary Clinton in the popular vote by 3 million votes. Really significant number when you really consider how large our country is, and the fact that Hillary Clinton, did exceptionally well in certain populous states. She really built up her totals in California. She built up her totals in New York State, her home state, and also in Illinois. And that led to her winning the popular vote by over 3 million votes. Pretty impressive. But unfortunately for Hillary Clinton, you see the check mark is next to Donald J. Trump. He won the presidential election because his team, the team that helped steer him to victory, figured out what was his best path to winning 270 electoral votes. And as we saw on that last slide, they were able to do that. They were able to put together the necessary states, the right amount of states to get past 270 electoral votes. So in 2020, as far as the popular vote is concerned, I'd be more than willing to take the bet of who will win the popular vote in 2020. I have no doubt that Joe Biden will win the popular vote in 2020. He's going to build up his totals in the same states that Hillary Clinton built up her totals in California, in Illinois, in New York State. But again, that's not how we decide our elections. It's the Electoral College. And that takes me to our final slide to show you where I think the race is today and where I think the race is likely to be even 6 weeks from today, which is Election Day. This is the 2020 electoral map. And you see it looks very different in terms of the totals than the 2016 map that I put up just a few moments ago. What you see here is, according to my view of where the race stands today, President Donald J. Trump has 260 electoral votes. Joe Biden has 232 electoral votes. And then you see there are states that are not colored red or blue. They are colored gray. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Before I get to each of these states, let me explain to you why I see this race where it is and how I filled in the electoral map. I just don't fill it in because the colors look pretty. I fill it in based upon a model that I used in 2016, which was successful in predicting the 2016 election and predicting Donald Trump's victory. So what I've done here is, even though if you look at polls in individual states, which show the election as very close, for instance, in Florida, the race has tightened up very much over the last few weeks. And if you look at recent polls for the state of Florida in the lower right-hand corner, the southeast part of the United States, it's colored red. Despite the fact that polls indicate it's essentially a toss-up. It's neck and neck. In fact, some polls even have Joe Biden ahead by a few percentage points. But those polls also are within the polls' margin of error. So that's not really a good indication. And even polls which show Donald Trump ahead, again, those polls are within the margin of error. But for the purposes of this presentation, for the purposes of giving you a clear idea about where I think the election is, I had to decide, okay, how am I going to color in this map? Based upon the historic nature of the state, the way it's voted before, and the way it's recently voted. So in Florida, if you looked at 2018, just 2 years ago, there were 2 statewide elections. There was a statewide election for governor, and there was a statewide election for the U.S. Senate. And in both of those statewide races, the Republican won. Governor Scott is now Senator Scott. He won the Senate election. He's a Republican. Governor DeSantis, who now presides over the state of Florida, is a Republican. Both of those races were very close. They were exceptionally close. They didn't involve recounts. That would have been really close, but they were very close. But ultimately, the state of Florida in the most recent statewide election leaned Republican for 2 statewide elections, and that was without Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. And to me, that is the reason why I've colored that state, which is typically what's called a battleground state. I've colored it in red. Now, I've also colored in North Carolina in red. That is a state that is also considered a battleground state. It is a state in which polls also indicate an exceptionally close race. But I had to, for the purposes of the presentation, for the purposes of filling in this map, I had to look at its past electoral history. And the president is not taking North Carolina for granted. In fact, he has visits planned to North Carolina every week, all the way up to Election Day. He has a visit to North Carolina already scheduled for this week. And so I colored that state in red, which, by the way, also went for Donald Trump in 2016. If you look at the upper northeast corner of the United States, you see a state that's colored red and blue. That's the state of Maine. And Maine does their electoral allotment for electoral numbers differently than the rest of the states, in that if you win a congressional district in the state of Maine, you can actually get one electoral vote. And that's what President Trump managed to do in 2016. He won the 2nd congressional district in Maine. It's a very rural district. And I colored it in the same way that it was colored in 2016, meaning I think that President Trump is once again going to win the 2nd congressional district in Maine. I was with the president. I traveled with the president on Air Force One to Maine at the very beginning part of June. And we went to that rural part of that state that supports the president, and the energy, the excitement for him was overwhelming. It was really surprising. I think it really energized the president as well. I would not be surprised to see the president take another visit to Maine just to shore up his support in that part of the state. That one electoral vote, it may not mean much, but if it's, as you see, a very close race, every electoral vote counts. And as you see, I colored in Ohio red. That was a state that the president won by 8 electoral, he won it by 8 percentage points in 2016, pretty significant over Hillary Clinton. It's much tighter this time around. He's not going, if he wins it, I think he will, it's not going to be by 8 percentage points. It's going to be a tighter race. And that's the reason why the president 2 days ago was in Ohio. He is not taking it for granted. He was in Dayton, Ohio, and also in Toledo, Ohio, shoring up his base, making certain that they come out and vote for him. And again, in states which have mail-in balloting, making certain that his supporters mail in their ballots. Here's an interesting fact. No Republican has ever won the presidency without winning Ohio. So that's how important Ohio is for the president. But again, I think he'll win it. I think he'll win Ohio. Now, let me take you to the 3 states that are not colored in, that will essentially, in my view, decide who wins the White House in 2020. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The 3 states the president managed to flip to the surprise of many people in 2016. I don't think it's going to be as easy for the president in 2020. So I'm prepared today, this Wednesday, to color in some of these states. Pennsylvania, for instance, with 20 electoral votes, I am prepared to color in, and I'm prepared to color it in for Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden's going to flip this state back blue, which is traditionally where it has been. And the reason being is because although Hillary Clinton made it a close race in Pennsylvania in 2016, she did not increase her totals to the extent that she needed to in Philadelphia and its suburbs. She won Philadelphia and its suburbs, but not by enough to offset what President Trump did in the rest of the state. This time around, the state that Joe Biden has visited the most since securing the Democratic nomination is the state of Pennsylvania. It's right next to his home state of Delaware, so it's easy to get there. But I think that one reason why President Trump will lose the state of Pennsylvania is because, A, he's lost the support of some of those suburban women outside of Philadelphia. That's one reason. And the other reason is because the turnout, I believe, is going to be much higher among Black voters in Philadelphia. And that is going to be significant. That will be the difference maker, I believe, for Joe Biden. And that's why I am prepared and pretty confident in coloring that state in blue, which would mean, if you looked at our map and it changed, it would mean 260 Trump, 252 for Joe Biden, with 2 states then deciding the presidency. So let's look further to the left, and we'll look next to the state of Michigan. 16 electoral votes. And as I mentioned, it was a state that surprised even the president's lead person in Michigan, the person who was running his campaign in Michigan in 2016. And it surprised the Clinton campaign as well. Democrats, the Biden campaign, they realized the mistakes that they made in 2016, and they are rectifying those mistakes. And for some of the reasons that Pennsylvania, I believe, will flip and turn blue, I believe that Michigan will also flip and turn blue, which means that if that's the case, those 16 electoral votes would also go to Joe Biden. And then if we were to recalculate this map from what it is right now, it would mean Joe Biden at 268, Donald Trump at 260, which means one state, the state of Wisconsin, in my opinion, will decide the presidential election. And both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are visiting the state quite often because they realize, I think both campaigns realize, and I talked to both campaigns. They ask me, hey, John, where do you see the map? And I tell them, I think it all comes down to one state. Just like in 2000, it came down to one state, the state of Florida. And 2004, it came down to one state, the state of Ohio. In 2020, I believe that it will likely come to one state, and that's the state of Wisconsin. If Donald Trump wins the state of Wisconsin, he's at 270 electoral votes on the money, right on the button, and that would be enough for him to win a second term. And that would be pretty remarkable to just hit it right on the head and get enough electoral votes, the exact amount that's needed to win a second term. If Joe Biden wins the state of Wisconsin, that puts him at 278. Boy, that's squeaking out a win for the presidency, but that would be enough. That would be obviously enough to put him over the edge. There are some states that the Trump campaign believes that they can flip. In other words, they lost them in 2016. They think that they can possibly win them in 2020. And the two states they're looking at to possibly do that, the state of Minnesota, 10 electoral votes, and the state of Nevada, which you see with 6 electoral votes. And I think it's a stretch for the Trump campaign to think that either of those states are going to vote Republican in 2020. Minnesota, it's been literally a half a century since Minnesota has voted for a Republican for president. And I don't think that that's going to happen this time around. Minnesota has 2 senators who are Democrats. The governor of Minnesota is Democrats. I think it's a blue state. And I think that if the Trump campaign believes they can flip it, to a certain extent, they're spending resources that could probably best be spent shoring up their support in other states. And the same can be said for the state of Nevada. With 6 electoral votes, Hillary Clinton won that in 2016, and I don't see that flipping either. The one state that Joe Biden thinks that he can flip beyond the ones that I've already mentioned, is the state of Arizona. 11 electoral votes. And the reason why they feel that is because the state is changing demographically. It has a growing number of Hispanic Americans living in the state, moving to the state. They typically, that demographic group typically votes Democratic. In fact, in the most recent election cycle, for the first time in decades, they voted for a Democratic senator from Arizona. And polls indicate, at least some polls indicate, that Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump in Arizona. But you'll see I colored it in red. I think that the historic nature of that state is such that in 2020, at least, it will continue to be a red state. It will continue to be a Republican state. I can't make that prediction 4 years from now because the demographics of that state are changing so quickly that I would say certainly in 10 years, it's going to be a blue state, just like New Mexico is right next door. But for now, I've colored it in red. I think it remains in Donald Trump's column. And that is the map as I see it right now. Things can change. Here's one thing that I want to take away. And Chris, I'm going to end my presentation on this, and then I'd be more than happy to take any questions that you have as well as any questions from our audience that's watching this presentation. People at the very beginning of the year, in my opinion, and by talking to lots of individuals all across the country, which I do, which is so important. It's so important to talk to people who are Trump supporters. If in Washington, D.C., you don't encounter them that often. It's so important to talk to Biden supporters as well to get a sense about where they see the race. And it's also important to talk to the campaigns, which I do pretty regularly. But here's the thing that I believe has taken place in our country. If you did not already know this, we are very divided. We are a very partisan country. And the country, I believe, has already made up its mind. In fact, despite all the things that have happened over the course of 2020, and think about how there are so many things that have impacted not just the United States, but the rest of the world. You have a health crisis, the coronavirus pandemic. You have an economic crisis, the United States economy essentially shutting down, and many world economies all around the world also shutting down. But also here in the United States, we have had, you probably saw it in newspapers, seen stories of it on television. We've had racial unrest that has existed, particularly in the months of June. That's when it really, I think, hit its apex. And most recently, we see the news, really recently, of a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, passing away, which creates an opportunity for President Trump to fill that vacancy. And that is going to create, obviously, a big battle between Democrats and Republicans. But ultimately, I think the writing's on the wall. Ultimately, the president's going to be able to have whoever it is who he wants to fill that vacancy confirmed by the U.S. Senate, which is controlled by Republicans. But that's going to be a battle. My point is, despite all of these events that I just mentioned, a health crisis, an economic crisis, racial unrest, a vacancy on the Supreme Court, at the very beginning of the year, people made up their minds. They're either going to vote excitedly for Donald Trump for another 4 years, or they're going to vote excitedly against Donald Trump, denying him another 4 years. There isn't that much excitement for Joe Biden as a person, like there was, for instance, like Barack Obama when he won the presidency in 2008. The excitement, however, on the other side from the Trump campaign is anti-Trump. And what's indicative of that is something that Chris mentioned right at the top about the money that's being spent in this campaign, and I mentioned as well, which is how much Joe Biden's campaign is outraising Donald Trump's campaign. Money, to me, shows excitement. Money shows energy, and there is energy on the Democratic side, the energy to defeat Donald Trump. So this country's divided. I believe they've made up their minds. In less than a week, we will have the first presidential debate. And I don't think that will change people's minds either, one way or the other. There are maybe 5% of the U.S. population, the U.S. electorate, that is undecided. That is true. But most Americans have already made up their minds. They made up their minds at the very beginning of the year, and that was before the coronavirus pandemic and the economic crisis and the racial unrest. And that's the reason why here we are in mid-September, and I'm talking about an electoral map 6 weeks away, and I feel pretty confident with this electoral map 6 weeks away because people in America, the electorate, has essentially made up their minds as to how they will vote on November the 3rd. And with that, Chris, I'd be more than happy to take any questions that you have, as well as any questions from the audience that's been tuning in.
Thank you, John. As I was listening to you, I was thinking, wow, what a thriller actually we are living through, which is not necessarily a good thing, to have too much excitement in politics, because this signifies something that you mentioned several times, and this is the division of the country. Now. We have a question from Olivier Marquette. about voting by mail, which is obviously on many people's minds. When do you think we'll know the final results of the election? And is there a chance to flip some other states other than Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina through these, mail votes?
Yeah, so great question, Olivier. Let me talk about the mail voting process first. For some states, this process is new. They haven't voted in this manner before. Now, every state allows absentee ballots. This is a little bit different. This is, for many states, you don't even have to have a reason as to why you can't vote in person. You can just simply, in some cases, request a mail-in ballot. And there are 9 states in America for this election cycle that you don't even have to request the mail-in ballot. They're going to send them to you, and then you can mail them back. So your question is, will we know a winner on November the 3rd or November the 4th? And I am preparing for not knowing the winner or on November the 3rd or November the 4th, because as you saw from my maps, it's a very close election. And as I mentioned, we're going to see the largest amount of mail-in voting take place in this country than we've ever seen before. And those ballots take time to count. You need to verify those ballots, and there's a process of verification. Sometimes there's a barcode attached to the mail-in ballot. There's a signature that you need to match up with what's on file, with what's been filed, with what's been sent in as far as the ballot is concerned. So I would prepare for not knowing on November the 3rd or November the 4th. As to when we will know, obviously I don't know the future. I don't know that part of the equation. But I want to remind you, Chris and Olivier, that in 2000, America and the rest of the world did not know who the winner of the 2000 election was until December the 13th. 5 weeks after the presidential election took place, that was when Al Gore ultimately conceded the election to George W. Bush. So is it out of the realm of possibilities that we'll be looking at 5 weeks before knowing who the winner of the 2020 election is? No, I think that is possible. Could there be legal battles associated with votes that take place in certain states? Yes, that could happen. And in fact, both parties right now are preparing for that. They've signed up lawyers, literally, in many of these battleground states, in case those states' contests are very close. They've even filed lawsuits ahead of time as it relates to some of the balloting procedures, the mail-in procedures that are taking place in certain states. So that's what I would expect as far as knowing when we'll have a winner announced for the 2020 presidential election. That's the first part of the question that I've answered. The second part is what other states have the possibility of flipping, and I've mentioned a few. Let me just mention 2 other states, Georgia and also North Carolina. Georgia has 16 electoral votes at stake. North Carolina has 15 electoral votes at stake. And no matter what election you're talking about in the world, there's a common theme, a common element, and that is whichever side can turn out their supporters the most wins. Whoever can energize their side more wins. And so what that means is if the vote of African Americans, the vote of Black voters, is energized so much, like it was there was a special election a few years ago in Alabama. And in that special election for a Senate seat in Alabama, which is a traditionally red state, it always votes Republican. Its senators are always Republican. In that special election, just a few years ago, a Democrat won statewide, really historic victory. And the reason why that Democrat won is because black voters in that state came out in numbers that were never seen before for any election, even the election of Barack Obama in 2008. And so in that particular election, that demographic group was energized. They were excited. They could not go and wait to vote for the Democratic nominee, Doug Jones. And if we see that same level of energy, that same level of excitement among black voters in 2020, well, they ultimately, to a certain extent, could impact in a major way the results of the 2020 election. So in Georgia, which has a large black population, if, like in Alabama a few years ago, black voters come out in numbers that we've never seen before, that could flip that state and put that state with its 16 electoral votes in Joe Biden's column. And right now, I've seen the most recent polls for the state of Georgia, and they indicate a very close race. There's an average of a 2% lead that Joe Biden has over Donald Trump right now, which is just really surprising. It's surprising, I think, to the Trump campaign. They've had to spend money that they didn't anticipate spending in the state of Georgia. And so that is one state, Olivier, that perhaps could flip depending upon turnout. And the other state, for the same reasons as Georgia, is North Carolina. There's a large black population that resides in the state of North Carolina, particularly in the Charlotte area. And if they are energized to vote in ways that we've never seen black voters vote before, even more so than the 2008 historic presidential election of Barack Obama, that too could impact how that state goes. So that is an unknown. No one knows that. No one can predict that. But the Democrats are certainly doing all they can to energize black voters in particular, and to get them to vote by mail early and just get their votes in and not have to worry about coming out and voting in person on election day, dealing with the various aspects of coronavirus. So that's something to certainly keep in mind. And so hopefully I answered that two-part question for you, Olivier.
And I cannot agree more with you about the importance of the African American vote in American presidential elections. If we go back to 2016, I believe the insufficient turnout among African Americans in Wayne County in Michigan, so that's around Detroit, and then Milwaukee in Wisconsin, led to numbers that were not favorable to Hillary Clinton. I believe the overall loss for her was about 80,000 votes, out of, 110 million cast. It's unbelievable. I can't even calculate what a small percentage is. But I would like to give the word to my co-host, Daniel Kiryakov, who wants to say a few words and ask a question about, I believe, social media in the campaign.
Okay, could I ask a question in the meantime, also covering the media?
Sure.
I don't know, are you able to hear me?
I can hear
First,
you.
of course, I'm quite interested what would be the effect of the traditional media over the campaign, because we know that during the mandate of President Trump, he had several clashes with different media outlets. And how do you think that this will influence the media coverage and will drive the results? And also, you remember the issue with this targeted social media advert, which basically was connected to the campaign. Do you think that the social media will continue playing this crucial role in converting or attracting voters to one or another candidate?
So both are really good questions. Let me take the first part of your question. The president has a very interesting relationship with the media. And I know this, because I've covered him, obviously, over the course of his presidency. The first time I interviewed Donald Trump was in 1999. So it goes back quite a few years. And I actually interviewed him for Fox Television on September the 9th, just 2 weeks ago. He has a love-hate relationship with the media. On the one hand, you've probably seen he's criticized certain news entities like the New York Times, like CNN, calling them fake news, calling it the failing New York Times. So he's pretty public about that. He's not afraid to criticize certain news organizations. At the same time, the love part is he likes talking to the media, and he doesn't ignore questions from CNN. He'll sit down to do an interview with the New York Times. So that's what I mean when I say he's got this love-hate relationship with the media. And he depends on the media. You know, when he calls a press conference on a moment's notice on any particular day, he's counting on news organizations that he typically criticizes to cover those press conferences. And they do. And so that will continue in the 6 weeks until Election Day. I think that most news organizations, which you've probably heard of, do a fine job. I know all the journalists that work at the White House quite well. I think that their motivations, by and large, are good ones, just delivering the news, not trying to insert their opinions in the news. That's the way I've always done things. I'm very old school in that way. And in fact, if you listen to my presentation, I hope you couldn't detect, how I'm going to vote. I just am just presenting an objective view of how I see the electoral map, and that's it. And that's the same way that I speak when I speak to each of the campaigns, just objectively, just analytically. So that, in my view, is the best way to deliver news, is just to be objective and present the news in a fair way, and then let people, the electorate, decide the opinions that they want to form on their own. As far as the second part of your question, social media, this played a role, certainly, in the 2016 campaign. We know that there was foreign interference. Our U.S. intelligence agencies have confirmed that, foreign interference specifically from Russia. But you have to keep in mind, I think that in 2016, people, like in 2020 to a certain extent, but it's more pronounced now, had made up their minds to a certain extent about how they feel about Donald Trump, how they felt about Hillary Clinton. And social media, to a certain extent, reinforced feelings that they already had. There, especially to the degree of Hillary Clinton, she was a known commodity. First lady for 8 years, U.S. Senator, Secretary of State. It wasn't like America did not know who Hillary Clinton was. And social media reinforced opinions that were good about her and reinforced opinions that people had that were bad about her. This time around, I think people are much more aware of the influence of social media. And I believe that what we've seen from certain social media sites like Facebook, like Twitter, they are on guard for efforts to influence in a negative way the 2020 presidential election. Facebook takes down fake accounts all the time. Twitter does the same thing as well. U.S. intelligence agencies are on guard for this, and maybe they weren't on guard for this in 2016, but now they are more aware and vigilant about it in 2020. And in addition to that, I believe that we've already seen Facebook and Twitter say they will not accept any political ads from any entity in the final week of the presidential campaign. So they don't want to be influential one way or the other in terms of tipping the election contest to Donald Trump or tipping it to Joe Biden. But social media is very important. It's the way that a lot of Americans actually get their news. They may not open up a newspaper. They may not watch television for the network newscast or watch the cable networks. They get it from social media. I teach a course at Georgetown. I've taught at Georgetown University for over 15 years, and I always ask my class, the first class of every semester, how do you get your news? How do you learn about what's happening in the world? And more the answer is social media. They have certain social media sites that they go to get their news. So social media will always play a role. What we're seeing from the Trump campaign is they are spending, I should say, a lot of money on social media. They feel that this is a good way to reach out to not only their supporters and keep them energized, but also perhaps trying to influence undecided voters. And again, the percentage of the electorate that's undecided is very small. It's probably 5% of the electorate, if that. And so you're spending a lot of money to try to influence a very small percentage of the people. And we'll see if those efforts are effective on the part of both campaigns. And so hopefully I answered both of those questions to your satisfaction.
And thank you for that. I think you answered another question from Olivier, which was about allegations of foreign influence on the election. And a few days ago, there was actually a report in the Washington Post about foreign actors trying to influence the 2020 elections. But let's combine a question that we have here from Denitsa Hinkova and Jasmina Ivanova, which is okay. We get to election date. We elect one or the other candidate. What would be the actual differences between a Donald Trump continuation of the presidency or a Joe Biden presidency in terms of policies?
Yeah,
from day one.
Yeah, in terms of policies, you would see if Joe Biden is elected president, a more internationalist president, someone who is very excited to and very much wants to reach out to the international community. And so for the U.S., that means a stronger relationship between the United States and the European Union, a stronger relationship between the United States and NATO. And as far as policy is concerned, you know this quite well in Bulgaria. We've seen how the president has embraced this policy in terms of trade tariffs. It's a trade tariffs policy that the president has embraced over the course of his 4 years in office. And that is not something that we'll likely see from Joe Biden if he's elected president. You won't see that adversarial relationship that sometimes exists between the United States and the European Union, and between the United States and certain European heads of state. Let's face it, the U.S. relationship with Germany is not what it used to be. Think about the U.S. relationship with Germany under both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. Very strong ally. Relations between the United States and Germany, for instance, under President Trump, are not that good. And what we see is the president reaching out in particular to Eastern European leaders for some of America's strongest allies. One leader the president likes very much, has reached out to quite a bit, is a European leader from Hungary, Viktor Orban. You know that quite well. And so that is one difference that we'll see in terms of policy, economic policy, trade policy, if Joe Biden is elected president on November the 3rd. By contrast, if Donald Trump is reelected, and I asked him a very similar question to what you just asked me 2 weeks ago when I interviewed him. I asked him, will he mend fences with the European Union if he wins a second term? And he did not answer that question directly, which was telling. The president likes, in terms of the way that he governs, he likes tension. He likes that adversarial nature that sometimes exists, even between allies. He likes having pressure sometimes put upon allies so that the president representing the United States can get its way. And I see that continuing. You know, when I asked him the question about mending fences, typically not typically, but more often than not, when I ask the president a question, sometimes he likes a turn of a phrase, and he'll repeat that phrase back in answering that question. Well, to me, he did not use the phrase mending fences when it came to U.S. relations with the European Union, which I think is pretty telling. He chooses his words sometimes very carefully. I mean, obviously, we can point to all the things that he's tweeted where you could argue he's not choosing his words carefully. But in that particular answer to my question, which is essentially the same question that you asked me, he did not talk about mending fences. He did not talk about patching up differences, about creating a stronger alliance between the U.S. and the European Union. I think that things remain essentially where they are if President Trump does win a second term.
Well, again, as I said, that's such a three-word of an election, and the consequences of the choice that America makes will be obviously felt around the world. Danielle, do you want to try to jump in again?
Second attempt. Do you hear me now?
Now I hear you perfectly.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
I have a phrase. Good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Exactly.
Good afternoon, Bulgaria. Yeah, fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for not getting into the bed today or tonight. And John, it was fantastic presentation of yours. You touched many topics. And for me, it was really exciting to see the map and the development in your thoughts on the elections. I have to say a couple of words, and first one goes to our supporter, America for Bulgaria Foundation. Thank you, Desi. Thank you, Nancy, for supporting us in this important webinar. I think it's important because we introduce the topic of the US elections to our membership, and the view of John's very not only exciting but full of knowledge, since he's covering the elections in the White House for decades. John, you don't look that old, but at the end,
Thanks.
Your record is quite amazing. A colleague of mine just said the question, but I wanted to say that you touched the international relationships of the United States, the trade disagreement with the European Union.
Right.
And my question, the next question is, how do you see the international topics emerging in that campaign? Because so far, at least to my knowledge, the foreign affairs weren't being part of the debate so far. And by mentioning in the debate, do you have any expectations of how the television debate will be conducted? What could be the messages? The jackets, the ties, the pins, whatever they use during that debate. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, absolutely. So two-part question, and let me take the first part of your question first, Daniel. It's an excellent question, but what we've seen in past election cycles and what is also present in this election cycle is that among the top concerns for American voters, it's rarely, and it's not the case this time, it's rarely international affairs or foreign relations or foreign policy. Rarely is that the case. Now, sometimes it is the case. In 2004, I think that election was very much about foreign policy because the Iraq War was going on. And for John Kerry at the time, he was making that a big selling point for his candidacy, that he would bring an end to the war in Iraq. Now there really isn't, an international issue that has risen to the top of Americans' concerns, that this particular topic is heard often on the campaign trail. Now, I can't speak for every voter. I can't get inside the head of every voter who can. But for most voters, their top issues are what they always are. It's jobs, it's the economy, now it's the coronavirus pandemic. For some voters, it's going to be the future of the Supreme Court. But foreign affairs and international relations, for the most part, doesn't, hit the top 5 list of voter concerns. We will hear this subject being brought up, however, in the debates. There's no doubt about that. The first debate is scheduled for Tuesday of next week, September the 29th. If you get up early, you can probably watch it. It starts at 9 p.m. Eastern time, which, if I'm not mistaken, is 3 a.m. Local time for you. So you can start your day by watching a presidential debate. And the first debate is going to be moderated by a colleague of mine from Fox News. His name is Chris Wallace. And yesterday, he put out the list of topics that he's going to cover in the course of the 1.5 hour, I think it's 1.5 hour debate. And so that means that both campaigns, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, can prepare for those topics. And the topics, by the way, are both domestic issues and international issues as well. So we'll hear from President Trump and we'll hear from former Vice President Joe Biden about how they view the U.S. role in the world, not only economically, but also diplomatically. We'll hear about how they view America's role in the world, also militarily, because what we've seen from President Trump in the course of his presidency and also over the course of the past few weeks is a desire, to use his words, to end America's endless wars. And that's the reason why he's spoken about decreasing the troop levels that America has in Iraq and Afghanistan. And also, we've seen him already announce that America is reducing its troop levels in Germany, of all places. So that is what we can expect, Daniel, I think, in the course of that first debate. There'll be 2 other debates that will follow that first debate. And I believe the second debate is going to be on October the 15th. So mark your calendar, same time. It would mean you getting up early, 3 o'clock in the morning for that debate. And also on October the 22nd, that's the third and final debate. That too would require you starting your day at 3 a.m. if you wanted to watch it live. And they're always interesting. And, you know, they're interesting. They're sometimes unpredictable. And I think that that's the reason why the first debate in particular, the one that's coming up next Tuesday, September the 29th, is probably going to have one of the largest television audiences for a presidential debate in American history. And also when you count in the worldwide audience, you know, people tuning in from Bulgaria and other places in Europe, also in Asia and Latin America, it's probably the largest number of people that will watch an American presidential debate. So, Daniel, I hope I answered both those questions well for you. Good, thank you.
I think President Trump would love high ratings of
Yes.
television performance. I think his campaign was pushing for a 4th debate, but I don't believe this is going to happen. This being the American Chamber of Commerce, we have a question from Alex Nestor, which is about the TTIP negotiations. Do you think, John, that they will be restarted under Joe Biden?
The short answer to that question, that's a great question, by the way. Excellent question. They're all good questions, but that's a really relevant question, you know, coming from AmCham. The short answer to your question is yes. I believe the TTIP would be restarted, perhaps even renegotiated with former Vice President Joe Biden if he is elected president. As I mentioned in my presentation, President Biden will likely have much of the same foreign policy approach that existed under Barack Obama. I don't think it's going to change all that much from what we saw under Barack Obama. And what we saw with President Obama were efforts to reach out to Europe with this TTIP trade deal and also reach out to Asia as well with another trade deal, which the U.S. under President Trump pulled out of at the very beginning of the Trump administration. So yes, different approaches. What we've seen with President Trump, and it's no surprise what I'm about to tell you, is that he is not a fan. He is not supportive of multilateral trade deals. He said this publicly. He likes unilateral trade deals. So that is one reason why the president has reached trade deals, bilateral trade deals with South Korea. You may recall, early on in his presidency, I was with the president in South Korea when that particular deal was struck. And talks continue in terms of reaching some sort of trade accord as well with the UK, now that the UK has, because of Brexit, pulled out of the European trading bloc. So those are some things that I would certainly expect if Joe Biden is elected president.
My natural inclination is to ask you questions about the campaigns because I love campaigning.
Okay,
I love the
sure.
excitement. But I want to keep it in the area of foreign policy because Bulgaria is, and that's not much of a secret, but Bulgaria is a battleground between different great powers, and has always been.
Sure.
Presently, we have competing energy projects and energy interests from the United States and Russia. We have military strategic interests from those countries. Do you see any difference in that region depending on who wins the White House in November?
Well, it's a good question. It's an excellent question. To a certain extent, yes. You've seen the president, when asked about U.S. Relations with Russia, President Trump, reflexively replies often, "Nobody," he says, "has been harder on Russia than I have." And then he provides examples of that. At the same time, the president has been reluctant over the course of his presidency to specifically criticize in any way Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. And I believe that will certainly continue if President Trump is reelected president. The president has spoken about how it's a good thing that he's trying to improve relations between the U.S. and Russia. I don't know if the president, if asked this question, would respond affirmatively. The question being, do you view Russia as an adversary? I don't know how he would answer that particular question. I have a feeling he wouldn't say yes. But if asked that particular question as it relates to China, the president wouldn't hesitate. He would say, absolutely, China is an adversary of the U.S. And then he would probably, because I know the president well enough, he would probably then launch into another critique of China as it relates to the way it managed the coronavirus and how it spread to the rest of the world. We also haven't heard much from the president in terms of strong criticism of Russia as it relates to what we've seen take place in Belarus over the course of the past few months. Moderate levels of criticism, but nothing really strong coming from the president. And so that would likely continue. That approach would likely continue if Donald Trump is reelected in November. By contrast, if Joe Biden is elected president, you'd see a much more different approach than that. We saw during the course of Barack Obama's presidency that there was this cool relationship that existed between Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin. The body language was so evident when they were in the same room together that they were not fans of each other, that they did not like one another, that they were distrustful of each other. The body language, very different, however, when you see, on the few times that we have seen, President Trump and President Putin in the same room, sitting across from one another. There's a warmth that exists between those two world leaders. And the president just yesterday asked about Vladimir Putin to give you the latest news, said he likes Vladimir Putin, and he says, and he likes me. So that gives you a sense about how the president views that relationship. Joe Biden, I think, would have a similar type of relationship with Russia and former Russian satellite countries that Barack Obama did during the course of his 8 years in office. So hopefully I answered that question for you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the mysteries of the Trump presidency is his affection for President Putin, which I know has lots of conspiracy theories behind it. But there is a topic that's related also to this region, which became the basis for the impeachment. All members here probably remember that it was started with Ukraine, and with what sorts of pressures President Trump has exhibited on Ukraine. But Joe Biden might be vulnerable on that account because of his son's involvement in the Burisma gas company. Do you think that's a real liability for Biden, or it can be brushed off as something that's, I'm not responsible for my son? What is your take in terms of the campaign, how it can affect affairs?
Well, yeah, so excellent question. We really, over the course of the past 2 months, have not really heard much coming from Republicans, coming from President Trump, in terms of focusing on this issue of former Vice President Joe Biden's involvement with Ukraine, his son Hunter's involvement with Ukraine, specifically this company Burisma. And one of the reasons we haven't is because it really didn't have resonance with the American public. It never really went anywhere in terms of trying to bring down former Vice President Joe Biden's approval ratings. And that's unfortunate, obviously, for the Trump campaign. If you're a politician, you want to try to, no matter where you are, whether you're in America or whether you're a politician in Bulgaria, you want to try to drive down the negatives of your opponent. And for whatever reason, it never really stuck. It never really took hold with the American public. One reason, I think, is because, for the most part, the mainstream media did not really pick up on this line of attack against Joe Biden. They really didn't. I think that to a certain extent, the mainstream media felt there wasn't much of a story there, or it had already been covered. Here's something that could happen. I don't know the future, but here's something that could happen. Let's say, for instance, that Joe Biden wins the presidential election in November. And let's say, for instance, that Republicans hold on to the U.S. Senate. Would I be surprised to see hearings being conducted by the Republican-led Senate looking into former Vice President Joe Biden's involvement in Ukraine, or Hunter Biden's involvement in Ukraine, specifically with the company Burisma? No, I wouldn't. That's politics. And if that scenario plays itself out, Joe Biden wins, Republicans hold on to the Senate, you can almost bet that's going to happen. That's the kind of environment, political environment, that we're in right now in the United States.
Again, I think American politics are so fascinating because of the breadth and depth of some of the topics. But as you mentioned earlier, Americans probably don't care much about foreign policy, unless it is some large issue like the war in Iraq, or the war in Vietnam. Years before that, or some having some major adversary. Exactly. We're about 9 minutes from the end of this fascinating conversation. I have a question about the topic that became very pertinent just less than a week ago, which is the Supreme Court. Which we have to remind the audience here that the Supreme Court is really the supreme body of power in the United States. Republicans look determined to go with the confirmation with Justice, which will be confirmed through the Senate, where they hold a slight majority. And this will end up in a probably 6-3 conservative to liberal Supreme Court.
Okay.
Do you think they are really willing to lose the presidential election on that issue? Because that seems to be a very unpopular move to rush this confirmation right now.
Is this better?
It is wonderful now.
Okay, good. Thank you, Peter. Let me start my answer from the top because you couldn't hear me. And that was a great question. Obviously, I can't get inside the head of every American voter out there in terms of how they feel about filling this vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. Republicans, especially Trump supporters, feel very unified that this nomination process and confirmation process should go forward. By contrast, Democrats, as you would expect, are unified that it should not go forward, which, by the way, are the exact opposite positions that each party had in 2016 when there was a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court that Barack Obama, who was then president, wanted to fill with someone named Merrick Garland. There are some U.S. senators that are quite frankly disappointed that they're going to have to vote on this nomination because I think that it will negatively impact them in terms of their reelection runs. Susan Collins of Maine, Cory Gardner of Colorado, they come to mind for sure. But look, the president's right. As you know, I'm a lawyer. I'm a member of the bar, and I'm very familiar with the U.S. Constitution. And the president is obligated to fill that vacancy. And then it's up to the Senate Majority Leader as to whether or not to take up that nomination. And so the president is fulfilling his constitutional duty in naming his replacement, which will be named this coming Saturday, I believe at 5 p.m. DC time, 11 p.m. Bulgaria time. And it will likely be a very conservative female jurist who will fill that role. But Republicans are all in, with the exception of two Senate Republicans, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. Republicans are all in supporting the president and supporting his effort to fill that vacancy very quickly on the U.S. Supreme Court, maybe even filling that vacancy before Election Day, which is a very fast process. So to answer your question, Chris, I think that to a large extent, Republicans are, to use an expression, saying, damn the torpedoes. We're going full speed ahead. We are going to fill that seat on the U.S. Supreme Court, let the chips fall where they may. And we think that Republicans think that this energizes the base and will help the president in the presidential election.
Yes, as I was saying, as you were saying, it can energize the base for Republicans. It can energize the turnout and the base of the Democrats as well.
Right.
So it will be one of those unpredictable things that we can add to this fascinating election that is just 41 days away. I would like to ask all participants to please turn on their cameras now so we can take a screenshot. I think we can have a quite a fair number of people. And I would like to thank everybody who showed up for this event. I would like to thank above you, Jon. I think if there are any unanswered questions, it's only because we are limited to our 90 minutes, like the presidential debate. But the topic is definitely for a conversation that can last for days on and on.
That's right.
Thanks to Danielle, thanks to Nadezhda Vakareva, thanks to Biljana, thanks to Olivier, thanks to Peter Ivanov, thanks to the Chamber, thanks to America for Bulgaria. I'm really honored to be hosting this event. I don't know, John, if you would agree to that we give your email to the members if they have some unanswered questions. I really hate to leave people hanging, and maybe they might have some questions after the
Sure. So let me
elections.
yeah, let me, if I may, just because, as you probably can imagine, I get probably 300 to 400 emails a day at my work email address. So let me give you my email address with Georgetown University, where, as I mentioned, I'm an adjunct professor. It's Jon, Jon, Decker, Decker, at georgetown.edu. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions offline regarding the presidential election. And let me just take this time as well, Chris, to thank you because you got up so early, West Coast time, 3 o'clock in the morning, to host this, and you did a phenomenal job. And of course, my thanks to AmCham Bulgaria and the entire team that put this great event together. It was a great event, and I thank you for inviting me. I'm honored by that, and I really appreciate it. Hopefully, this was a useful session for each of your members that were able to watch and tune in and perhaps ask a question as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And John and Chris, thank you. Thank you both. I believe that we are going to have a chance to invite you both, not on the video conferencing, very soon. And
okay.
we're going because definitely it was very interesting discussion. I would say that in general, our members are not very familiar with the way how the president elections are going on in the United States. But probably this is the moment when Bulgaria is totally looking to the West. For the first time, we purchased the defense equipment from the United States.
Right.
We actually improve all of our relationship for many, many years. I should say that Bulgaria and America never used to be enemies. Somebody else put them on the enemy camps. And this is not we. We, like Bulgarians, are always looking very positive on the United States. And that's why it's so interesting for us, because we're standing exactly on the border between the Russian bear and and the rest of the things which is happening on our southeast border. At the moment, the tension is very high, and we cannot count on many friends. As people say in our country, you save me from my enemies, I'm going to save myself from my friends.
Okay.
So we used to have in our history many fake friends, which is still around, but now we need to find our real friends, and that's why it's so important to stay in touch, John. I had the privilege to see you in Washington. It's even more important if someday you come to Sofia.
That would be great. I would love that.
Actually, we may have opportunity next year because Bulgaria may host 3Cs initiative next year in Sofia. It may happen.
That'd be
Still
great.
don't know. So you, like a correspondent of the White House, would be more than welcome to be around when the many senior government officials from the United States may come, if this will be the fact. So stay tuned. And Chris, you contributed so much, first to getting up so early, but not only, because you are for many years working for AmCham, actually much more than I. And we do really appreciate to welcome you back to support us. Thank you to accept this invitation, although so early. Gentlemen, we are very pleased with everything what you've done for us and our members. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye, Chris.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.